Imagine that you're an experienced pilot flying for your country's national airline. You have just taken off from an airport you've departed hundreds of times in your career. There's just one problem. You don't know what height you're at, or at what speed you're travelling. And there's one more issue. It's nighttime. This is the story of Aeroperu Flight 603. It's just after midnight on October 2nd, 1996. Aeroperu Flight 603 prepares for takeoff from Jorge Chávez International Airport in Lima, Peru. Its destination, Santiago in Chile, is a 3-hour journey. The plane is a 4-year-old Boeing 757, a modern aircraft in 1996 with an excellent safety record. It is flown by two of the national airline's most experienced pilots. Captain Eric Schreiber, 58, and First Officer David Fernandez, 42, have logged almost 30,000 flight hours between them. On board are 61 passengers and 9 crew. Most of the passengers are Chilean, though there are many other nationalities on board, including 11 Peruvians, 6 Mexicans, 4 British, a New Zealander, and other Latin Americans. The weather on the night is good for flying. Light winds, no rain, and good visibility on the ground. About 1,000 feet above the ground, there is a layer of flat clouds. The atmosphere in the cockpit is calm as the pilots ready the aircraft for takeoff, with the captain making a joke about the crew's precision. At just after 12:30, the plane is cleared for takeoff. The takeoff run is uneventful, but shortly after the aircraft becomes airborne, First Officer Fernandez notices something unusual. The altimeters are instruments which tell the pilots how high they are, based on the air pressure outside the aircraft. They read 0, but the plane is clearly flying. The plane is equipped with 3 altimeters, one for pilot, one for co-pilot, and one backup. All 3 have failed. The aircraft enters the clouds, and the pilots must now rely on their instruments, 3 of which, they have noticed, are not working. Captain Schreiber notices that his speed reading is not showing the speed he had asked Fernandez to maintain. Fernandez then notices that his speed reading is incorrect.
Positivo, ponle 10 grados, estamos bajando. Qué raro.
The rudder ratio warning indicates that the plane's computers think it is travelling at high speed, so it cautions the pilots against using large or abrupt rudder movements. This operates on the same principle as the steering in a car. The faster you go, the smaller your movements on the wheel should be. But the aircraft is not travelling fast, it just thinks it is because of its faulty sensors. The Mach trim warning, which the pilots also receive, is also related to the aircraft's speed. It indicates that the plane's horizontal stabilizer is not properly aligned for high-speed flight. Again, this warning is erroneous. The plane is not in high-speed flight, but the aircraft has no way of knowing that. And because the pilots are flying in cloud at night, the instruments are all they have to rely on. They are as blind as the aircraft they are flying. Captain Schreiber orders his first officer to turn out towards the sea to avoid the mountains around Lima.
Mira a la derecha. Sube. Estoy 10. Sube, estás bajando, David. Estoy arriba. Sí, pero se ha trancado. Mach trim rudder bridge. Ahora estás. Sube.
In full awareness of the gravity of their situation, Schreiber then asks Fernandez to declare an emergency.
Estamos en emergencia.
Torre, Aeroperu 603.
Aeroperu 603, torre, prosigan.
Que declaramos emergencia, no tenemos instrumentos básicos, ni altímetro, ni velocímetro. Declaramos emergencia.
Recibido. Altitud.
No tenemos, tenemos hasta 1000 pies, aproximadamente.
1000 pies. Recibido. Aeroperu 603. Confirme si es posible cambiar frecuencia 119,7 a fin de recibir.
Pasamos a 19.
Ahora se han desconectado.
For the first time, Captain Schreiber takes control of the aircraft, while First Officer Fernandez attempts to troubleshoot the problem. Fernandez requests directions from air traffic control to return to the airport, but Schreiber disagrees, saying that they should try to understand what is happening first.
En Lima 603. Velocidad.
603, Lima.
Estoy manteniendo 5 grados.
Sí, solicitamos que nos victoree para ILS Pistón 5.
Todavía no vamos a estabilizar.
Se le sigue por la derecha rumbo 330.
Si le saca radio
Derecha
derecho,
rumbo
dice,
330.
Afirmativo, y mantenga la presente altitud.
altitud, no podemos.
¿Qué nivel tenemos? Tenemos 4000 pies, a ver si nos confirma.
Correcto, mantiene 4000.
Tenemos 4000.
Afirmativo.
This comes as a relief for the pilots, as they now believe that one of their altimeters is working. Neither the controller nor the pilots are aware that this altitude displayed on the controller's scope is incorrect. It is being sent from the plane's faulty sensor. This oversight will play a crucial role for the rest of the flight, as the pilots continue to believe that this information is accurate.
Actitud nada más. El radio derecho debe estar. Autoradio desconnect. No tenemos control, ni siquiera los básicos. A ver, revisa todo. Ya no importa, seguimos subiendo. Sin velocidad estamos volando, sin ser.
Fernandez begins flipping through the aircraft checklist to find out how to deal with the problems.
Entrando esta. Ciclo. Correcto, Lima Torre 18,1 horas. 18.
Ya, al bullshit no podemos ni volar. Es que no tenemos ni siquiera airdata. A ver, ya. ¿Ah? Ya.
8000, 9000.
Aquí.
Aeroperu 603 se recibe ahora con nivel 9200. ¿Qué rumbo le indica ahora?
Estamos
Rumbo
volando
205.
Afirmativo.
The crew decide that it would be best to return to the airport rather than to try and troubleshoot the problems out over the Pacific Ocean. They follow the instructions given by air traffic control and begin to set the aircraft up for a landing in Lima. They must fly the plane manually, as the autopilot requires at least 2 of the 3 altitude and speed indicators to agree with each other, and in this case, none of them agree. For the first time, air traffic control provides the pilots their ground speed.
Aeroperu 603 está a 40 millas de Lima y según la pantalla con el nivel 120. Velocidad aproximada de 310 nudos sobre el terreno.
Sí, estamos 12.000 pies, mantenemos en velocidad, tenemos 230 y estamos girando rumbo 330.
Recibido.
Unlike the altitude, the speed reading provided by the controller is correct. It is calculated by the controller's radar monitoring the distance flown by the plane in a given period of time. The pilots now believe that they have 2 reliable pieces of information from air traffic control, their altitude and speed. In fact, only the speed reading provided by air traffic control is correct.
Voy a tratar de bajar con todo cortado. Vaya, está subiendo. No, bajemos a 10.000 pies. ¿Por qué será tanto la velocidad? ¿Será la velocidad real? No puede ser. Entonces, a ver, sí. Radio derecho Max Speed Trim. ¿No hay eso, Max Speed Trim?
No hay Max Speed Trim, no. A ver, sigue volando, se va. Sí. Está cortado y lo ves así. ¿Nos indica velocidad, por favor?
Diga 320.
Correcto. Tenemos todos los motores cortado, sí, está acelerando y acelerando.
Ok, recibido.
De repente, a ver,
Está la velocidad bien, los tres indicadores están bien en velocidad. Pase. Overspeed.
As the crew start their descent, their indicated airspeed begins to increase rapidly. The high speed sensed by the aircraft generates a new warning, the overspeed warning. This is a serious warning. If the pilots fly too fast, the force of the air could tear the aircraft apart. They extend the speed brakes in an effort to slow the plane.
puede ser, pues.
The captain correctly determines the overspeed warning must be false.
Nada más si hay ready recho, no hay ni desconectame. ¿Cuál será la velocidad real?
Está bien la velocidad.
Eso. Pero con poder cortado, no puede ser, pues con poder cortado. Hay un problema en el instrument source. ¿A cuántas millas? 30 millas de Lima. A ver, empezamos a bajar con el spoiler. Y flight level change.
Velocidad cruzando el 260 de Lima a 31 millas al oeste. El nivel es 1.0 más 700 y velocidad aproximada de 280 sobre el terreno.
Perfecto.
Sí, para acá tenemos indicación de 350.
Vamos a poner...
Recibido.
Además está con speed brake. Todo se ha ido, todos los instrumentos se han ido a la mierda.
The overspeed warning returns, and this time it is accompanied by a contradictory warning, the stall warning. The plane is now telling the pilots that it is flying too fast and too slow all at once. Aerodynamic stalls are caused when the air isn't flowing straight over the wing, but at an angle. The direction of the oncoming air is picked up by an instrument on the outside of the aircraft, which acts like a weather vane. It sends information about the direction of the oncoming air to the cockpit, and warns the pilots if the angle is too close to the stall angle by shaking their control columns violently. This system is entirely separate from the pitot-static system, which is the source of all of the aircraft's erroneous readings so far. First Officer Fernandez realizes this and tells the captain, but Captain Schreiber is so confused by all of the contradictory alarms that he doesn't know what to believe. The responsibility he is under is immense. Both the overspeed and stall warnings are serious, but which should he believe? Is he in danger of going too fast or too slow? 70 lives depend on whether he chooses to believe the right warning. In the last-ditch effort to save the aircraft, the first officer asks if there is another plane which can fly out to guide the crew back to the airport.
Solicitamos un avión. ¿Hay algún avión que pueda salir a rescate de nosotros?
Espérate, no.
Sí, correcto, vamos a coordinar de inmediato. Está coordinando de inmediato.
¿Un avión que nos pueda servir de guía, algún Aeroperu que esté por ahí, algo?
No le digas nada a eso.
Sí, porque ahorita estamos en Pepe.
Atiende, tenemos un 707 que va a salir para Pudahuel, se le está avisando.
Es ficticio.
No, si tenemos cheque, ¿cómo no va a estar?
Shaker, pero es... con speed brake y todo. Estamos manteniendo 9.500 pies. ¿Por qué no da la misma? No entiendo. La potencia, ¿cuánto tenemos de potencia?
Aeroperu 603 ha efectuado un ligero viraje a la izquierda, ahora está volando con rumbo 320 y se lo observa con el nivel 100. Velocidad aproximada de 220 nudos y distancia de Lima a 33 millas al noroeste.
The crew's onboard altimeter and the air traffic controller confirm that they are flying at a constant altitude. However, in reality, they are descending precariously close to the sea. Then, the stick shakers activate again, vibrating the pilot's control columns. Despite this, the overspeed warning continues to sound, along with the Mach trim warning and rudder ratio alarm. The pilots are totally confounded by this barrage of warnings and alarms. The captain believes the overspeed warning, while the first officer believes the stall warning. Both pilots believe that they are at 9,500 feet, as this altitude has been verified by air traffic control.
9.000 pies se te indica, sí, pues, es ficticio. Todo el pitón se ha ido, el air data se ha ido a la mierda.
Aeroperu 603, su base está informando si sus dos sistemas de computadoras están fuera de servicio.
Tenemos ningún instrumento funciona de velocímetro, tenemos alarma de alta velocidad y no, aparentemente no está.
Recibida,
Hemos tenido shaker de alta velocidad.
El fast forward está indicando mucha velocidad. Estamos
Con los motores cortados y no desacelera aparentemente.
aparentemente.
recibido.
Then, the second chance to diagnose the problem comes, when the pilots receive the most frightening warning yet.
Estaría listo para minutos para proceder a ayuda.
Too low terrain. 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 Too low terrain.
Alarma de terreno.
Too low terrain.
Alarma de terreno.
Too low terrain.
Like the stall warning, the ground proximity warning system alert is generated by a different system than that which the altitude and speed readings come from. The altitude information generated by this instrument comes from a sensor called the radio altimeter, which is located on the underside of the aircraft. This sensor bounces radio waves off the ground and calculates the aircraft's altitude based on how long it takes these radio waves to return. This instrument generates a warning when the aircraft ascends rapidly below 2,500 feet. But the pilots are so confused by all of the contradictory alarms that they are travelling too fast, too slow and too low all at the same time, that they do not properly consider the seriousness of responding incorrectly to this warning if it is indeed true.
Terrain.
Recibido. Según monitores indicaron con nivel 100 volando con rumbo hacia el noroeste.
Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
Terreno y
Too low terrain.
solamente a 10.000 pies.
Too low terrain.
Según el monitor estimado 105.
Wind shear. Wind shear. Wind shear. Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
Recibido Aeroperu
Too low terrain.
603.
Wind shear. Wind shear. Wind shear.
No lo entiendo.
Too low
Se
terrain.
menciona que está efectuando distancia a la izquierda. Está circulando hacia el oeste.
Afirmativo, estamos rumbo 250, pero estamos yendo hacia el mar porque tenemos mensaje de terreno, alarma de terreno.
Sí, afirmativo, se refiere que está a 42 millas, volando con rumbo hacia el oeste, rumbo 250.
They could at this point disregard the altitude readings on their faulty altimeters and trust the new reading from the radio altimeter which is shown up in their primary flight display. However, this does not occur to the pilots. The altitude reading from air traffic control is one of the few that the pilots have grown to trust, and they have confirmed it against the captain's altimeter numerous times. Thus the pilots believe both the radio altimeter and the barometric altimeter, which would mean that they are about 10,000 feet above sea level and less than 2,500 feet over land. The only reason this could occur is that the aircraft is over high terrain, in this case the Andes Mountains. This leads the pilots to believe, incorrectly, that they have accidentally overflown the city and are rapidly approaching the Andes Mountains to the east of Lima. In reality, they have been above the water the entire time.
Volando con rumbo hacia el oeste, rumbo 250, hacia el oeste.
Acá estamos sobre el agua, ¿no es cierto?
Afirmativo, sobre el agua, está a 42 millas al oeste.
Ok.
Then, air traffic control informs the pilots that they are flying at 200 knots, dangerously close to a stall speed.
No tenemos como 370 nudos. ¿Estamos bajando ahora?
Tercera la misma velocidad, está con 200 de velocidad aproximadamente.
¿200 de velocidad?
Y 220 de velocidad sobre el terreno, reduciendo la velocidad ligeramente.
Carajo, ahorita estoleamos.
Sink rate. Sink rate. Sink rate. Sink rate.
¿Tú estás agarrando? No. Vamos para arriba un poco.
Amid all of the warnings and alarms, there were now three sources of information that the pilots could trust. 1. The ground speed provided by the controller. 2. The altitude provided by the plane's radio altimeter. And 3. The stick shaker indicating that the plane was flying almost too slow to sustain flight. None of these pieces of information are generated by the same system which caused the false airspeed and altitude readings. These three pieces of information would have been enough for the pilots to fly safely, but they cannot pick them out from the barrage of false warnings.
Es el overspeed. Entonces, Cabin altitude alert. Mach. Ahorita digo.
Communication between Schreiber and Fernandez has broken down. The pair are not approaching the problem systematically or with any real delegation of workload. They continue to refer to the checklists, but there is nothing in there which can help them. The plane's instruments continue to display an altitude of 9,700 feet as it descends ever closer to the water below.
Vaya a tratar de interceptar el ILS.
Aeroperu 603, vamos a tratar de interceptar el ILS a ver si nos indica, aceptamos el...
Recibido, Aeroperu 603. Se lo observa ahora con el nivel 9700.
Está bien.
Atento para verificar la velocidad y va a esperar el Boeing 707. Ya está iniciando el rodaje.
Verifica la velocidad, muy importante, no tenemos velocidad a bordo.
Correcto, está iniciando curva y se lo observa con velocidad de 270. Gran speed.
270.
Alert. Altitude alert.
Autopilot. No le pongas nada de piloto automático. Alerta, autopilot, disponente, autopilot.
El rumbo para intentar localizar aproximadamente por las 30 millas debe volar el rumbo 070. Aproximadamente mantenga estable el rumbo del avión para informarle.
Vamos a mantener 070 en el rumbo. Mantenemos rumbo, parece que tenemos bien el rumbo. Lo que no tenemos es Airspeed Indicator y la altitud 9700 tenemos.
Flight level change.
Frente a la altitud 9700 y la velocidad 240 nudos se le observa. Velocidad verdadera sobre el terreno.
Pero ¿cómo puede estar volando con esta velocidad si estamos bajando con todo el poder cortado?
Informa altura, por favor, porque tenemos el claim que no...
Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
700 según la
Too low
presentación.
terrain. Too low terrain.
Vaya 700.
Too low terrain. Too low
Sí,
terrain.
correcto. ¿Cuál es la altura que
Too
indica
low terrain.
el avión? ¿Tiene alguna
Too low
referencia?
terrain.
700, pero...
Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
Con 370
Too low terrain. 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 Too low terrain.
¿Pero qué hacemos con el tren? No sabes qué ver.
Estamos impactando en agua. Dale, perdida.
Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
No la tengo.
Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain. Too low terrain.
Nos vamos a invertir.
Aeroperu Flight 603 impacted the Pacific Ocean at 11 minutes past 1 a.m. It hit the water left wingtip first at 70 degrees bank, travelling at over 460 kilometers an hour. There were no survivors. When the rescuers arrived on scene, they found 9 bodies floating in the water. The rest had sunk with the aircraft. Even on impact, the captain's altimeter read 9,700 feet above sea level. Nobody on board would have known anything was amiss until the aircraft's left wing first hit the water. In the darkness, they could see nothing outside the windows, and the climbs and descents made by the crew during their 30-minute ordeal were too subtle to have been noticed by anybody on board. The investigation into the crash was carried out by the Accident Investigation Board of Peru, with assistance from the US-based National Transportation Safety Board. In their search for the wreckage of the plane on the seabed, the Peruvian Navy discovered both black boxes intact. As well as this, they found a key piece of evidence on the aircraft's fuselage. Each of the aircraft's static ports, which sense its altitude and speed, were covered with tape. Without having direct contact with the air outside the plane, this instrument is unable to determine air pressure and thus altitude. And without knowing the pressure of the air outside the plane, the air data computer cannot calculate the aircraft's speed either. Investigators later discovered that this tape had been used to cover the ports while the front of the plane was being polished, but that the mechanic who put it on forgot to remove it. The tape was also missed by his supervisors as well as the captain who carried out the walk-around just before the flight. Investigators suspect that the grey colour of the tape made it difficult to see when contrasted with the grey fuselage. The final report into the accident concluded that while this piece of tape was the primary cause of the accident, Captain Schreiber, quote, made a personal error by not complying with the procedure for ground proximity warning system alarms and not noticing the readings of the radio altimeters in order to discard everything which he believed to be fictitious. It also concluded that, quote, the co-pilot made a personal error by not being more insistent, assertive and convincing in alerting the pilot in command much more emphatically to the ground proximity warning alarms. Partly as a result of this crash, Aeroperu went bankrupt in March 1999. Boeing took legal responsibility for failing to train pilots to deal with this type of emergency and paid out compensation of over $1 million per victim to the families of those who died. The mechanic who forgot to remove the tape was convicted of negligent homicide. If you'd like to see more of these videos, please subscribe. This is the first in a series of videos I'll be making about air accidents. I plan to release a video each week covering what I consider to be the most interesting aviation accidents over the past few decades. Thanks again to those who allowed me to use their photographs for this short documentary.